Hi, my name is Varel. Thank you for being here with me. If you want to hear more true family drama stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. It helps me keep sharing them with you. I want to tell you a story not just about a gift I never received, but about what that absence revealed. The room was glowing with celebration. Strings of lanterns swayed gently, light shimmering across the lacquered wood of the long table. It could have been any occasion: my mother's birthday, my grandmother's memorial, or the party for the new house. It didn't matter which, because the script was always the same. Relatives gathered in polished shoes, arms full of offerings, voices raised with the warmth of habit. At the center, gifts piled high. Shiny paper crinkled as hands reached toward and revealed treasures: the latest iPhones, sleek iPads, envelopes so thick with cash they bent like they carried secrets. Each of my siblings beamed as their prize was handed over, their names spoken out loud as if announced on stage. For you, for you, for you. Applause followed, cameras clicked, and the ritual of belonging continued. When my turn came, a hush rippled. I extended my hands instinctively, palms open, still believing the rhythm would not skip me. But instead of a phone, an envelope, a wrapped box, I was given a plate. Empty. Porcelain gleamed beneath the fluorescent light, bare as a sheet of ice. Someone laughed. Someone else murmured, symbolic. My throat closed. I tried to smile, to make it seem light, to pretend this absence was just a joke too fragile to name. But the plate stayed heavy in my lap. The more I stared, the more it revealed itself. Not a gift. A void. A message. The silence around it louder than any birthday song. On the surface, it was about gifts, wasn't it? One daughter forgotten while the others carried new machines, their screens lighting up like promises. But underneath, the truth pressed harder. This plate wasn't empty by accident. It was the key that unlocked a vault of records I had been told never existed. Bank accounts drained without a word. A will rewritten behind closed doors. Ideas I had written credited to someone else's voice. The plate became a motif. A cruel shorthand my seat at the table existed, but my name had been scraped off the card. My share had been edited out, my presence tolerated but not celebrated. Everyone else had a portion, a slice of the inheritance, emotional or financial. What I had was proof of erasure. I traced the smooth rim with my finger, and I remembered. All the times they said I was too much. All the stories where I was written as the unstable one, the ungrateful one, the guest at my own family's feast. And now the evidence lay before me, polished and white. A blank canvas carrying the weight of everything unsaid. I looked around. My siblings' laughter bounced against the walls, amplified by champagne. My mother's face glowed with satisfaction as she watched them unwrap the future in their hands. None of them noticed me. Or perhaps they noticed perfectly well. That was the point. In that moment, the plate stopped being just porcelain. It became a receipt. A record. A certificate of absence with my name etched in silence. And suddenly I understood the inheritance I had been given wasn't money or property. It was silence. What would you call it? A family. A performance. A ritual of exclusion disguised as generosity. As I placed the plate carefully on the tablecloth, I felt a strange calm. I had been handed nothing, but nothing can also be a mirror. It shows you what was missing long before anyone else dared to admit it. This was not the end. It was only the hook. The beginning of a deeper archive, a set of files I never knew I had access to because they had tried so hard to bury them. The empty plate was not absence. It was evidence. The celebration glittered like it had been staged for a magazine spread. White linen spilled over the tables in perfect folds, ironed so sharp you could almost cut your fingers tracing them. Crystal glasses gleamed under the light, waiting for champagne that frothed into golden bubbles the moment it was poured. Each chair was dressed with a satin bow tied into a flawless knot, as if even furniture had been invited to dress better than me. Servers floated by balancing trays of mimosas whose orange hue glowed like liquid sun. The music was a soft, deliberate choice jazz that slid across the room in silk notes, the kind of sound meant to signal refinement without demanding attention. It was a room built to impress, not to comfort. Every detail whispered elegance, prestige, perfection. but I wasn't seated in the perfection. My chair stood near the kitchen door, so close I could hear the hinges creak, and the muffled orders shouted behind swinging panels. Each time the servers passed, they brushed so close I had to tuck my knees in as though I were an obstacle instead of a guest. From here, the main table glowed like a stage I had no ticket for. My siblings sat in the spotlight, their laughter harmonizing with clinking glass. I sat in the shadows where the air smelled faintly of garlic and bleach from the kitchen sink. They called this family, but the seating chart told the truth. Appearances were the star. People, especially me, were an afterthought. Everywhere I looked, the obsession with polish gleamed. Napkins embroidered with the family crest I had once designed, though no one said my name when they admired them. Centerpieces bursting with roses the color of fire, their fragrance masking the staleness that sat heavy in my chest. Even the toasts were rehearsed with practiced smiles and camera-ready pauses. I raised my glass when they raised theirs, but no one clinked mine. The sound reached me anyway, crystal striking crystal high and bright like bells announcing someone else's joy. The polite laughter that followed each anecdote felt rehearsed, too synchronized like a chorus in a play. I wanted to join, but my laugh caught in my throat. Inside, the rhythm was different, offbeat, dissonant, like a piano missing a key. Appearances. People. That was the unspoken theme embroidered into every detail of the night. They wanted the room to sparkle so brightly no one would notice who was missing from the glow. I glanced at my reflection in the window beside me, framed by condensation from the kitchen steam. My face looked dim there, blurred compared to the sharp brightness of my siblings under the chandelier. I could almost believe I wasn't really part of this scene, just an observer watching from behind glass. The worst part wasn't that I was seated apart. It was that they wanted me seated apart. That my distance made the symmetry more perfect, the picture more pristine. A misfit hidden in the margins so the center could shine without shadow. And so I sat tracing the rim of my glass, listening to the careful rise and fall of their voices. The laughter was too smooth, the clinking too constant, like a soundtrack that didn't match the film playing in my head. My inner world ran jagged while theirs shimmered seamless. They had built a stage that dazzled strangers, but they forgot the most basic truth behind every curtain: the cracks still show. And from where I sat right next to the kitchen door, I could see every single one. The moment arrived with the soft lift of a crystal glass. My father stood at the head of the table, his silhouette haloed by the chandelier above. The jazz slipped into a slower rhythm as though the room itself leaned in to hear his words. His voice carried with the authority of someone who believed every sentence deserved applause. To our youngest, he declared, tilting his glass toward me. A spotlight of eyes followed, pinning me in my seat. I felt my stomach tighten, though I smiled, rehearsed and ready. Our youngest doesn't need material things. He continued, his tone warm, practiced, public. She values spirit above possessions. The room erupted. Laughter rang out in uneven bursts like coins tossed onto marble floors, scattered sharp, impossible to gather back. Some clapped, some smirked, others repeated the line in whispers, as though it were a clever joke worth passing on. I joined them with a polite laugh, the kind you shape carefully so no one notices it hurts. But under the table, my hand knotted the napkin so tightly the fabric wrinkled into veins. My nails dug into the weave, desperate for something solid to hold on to, while the sound of their laughter rippled around me. I had heard variations of this joke my whole life. You're the dreamer. You live on ideas. You don't care about money like the rest of us. It was always said with a smile, but the smile cut deeper than any frown. Because what it really meant was you don't belong in the ledger. You don't count in the will. Your seat is ornamental, not central. My father's toast wasn't just a joke. It was a declaration, a binding contract spoken into the air. And everyone agreed, laughing like witnesses. In that moment, I wasn't the daughter at the table, I was the punchline they toasted with champagne. I forced my lips into the smile I'd trained since childhood. The I'm fine smile. The one that curved just enough to look graceful in photographs but never touched my eyes. The one that said, "Don't worry, I won't ruin your mood with the truth of mine." It was armor I had worn since I was small, polished through years of being told to be grateful for scraps of attention, for shadows of love. Inside, the words dug trenches. Did they really believe I didn't need material things, that I didn't deserve them? That my worth was measured in spirit alone, while they counted their worth in envelopes, devices, inheritances. I glanced at the gifts lined along the table, shining gadgets reflecting chandelier light, envelopes swelling with unspoken promises. They laughed and clinked glasses over them while I clutched a napkin in my lap. That contrast was the joke. That was the performance. And I was expected to laugh along. But something shifted in me as I watched their glasses rise and fall, their laughter bouncing off polished walls. The joke wasn't funny anymore, not because it was cruel, but because it revealed what they could no longer hide. They had dressed it in charm and the silk of humor and the safety of tradition, yet it was naked truth I had been cut out. Appearances were their shield. Polished tables, glowing glasses, rehearsed toasts. But beneath it the script was bare. They wanted me to inherit silence, not substance. As I unfolded the napkin, my fingers trembling against the creased fabric, I knew this wasn't just a line in a toast. This was the inciting incident. The moment the mask slipped. The moment the empty plate turned into evidence. They thought they were laughing at me. But really they were laughing at the secret they had all conspired to keep. And secrets never stay silent forever. The laughter from my father's toast still echoed when something inside me began to spool backward, as though an old cassette had been pressed into reverse. The present blurred, and memory came rushing back in jagged fragments. Moments I had tucked away, convinced they were too small to matter. Yet strung together, they revealed a pattern as deliberate as any seating chart. I remembered the speech. Not tonight's toast, but another years ago at a charity gala. I had stayed up late scribbling draft after draft, searching for words that could give my father gravitas, make him sound both wise and human. When he stood before the crowd, he read every word exactly as I had written it. The room applauded. He smiled. And when people came up afterward, shaking his hand, praising his eloquence, he thanked them without hesitation. He never said my name. My words had been rebranded into his voice as though they were always his to begin with. Then came the project. My older sister had been given a leadership role at her company, a chance to prove herself. She came to me desperate, admitting she didn't know where to begin. I stayed up 3 nights straight, piecing together a plan, designing mock-ups, preparing slides. When the big day arrived, she stood before her colleagues with my work glowing on the screen behind her. Her name in bold at the bottom. She looked radiant, confident, complete. And when applause rose when her boss praised her innovation, she never mentioned me. My fingerprints erased by the stamp of her title. There was also the family crest. A simple design sketched in the margins of a notebook while I was still in school. I had played with symbols waves, for resilience oak leaves, for endurance a single star, for hope. I showed it once, casually, not realizing how hungry they were for anything they could call legacy. Years later, I saw it embroidered on napkins, etched into stationery, engraved onto the plaque at the entrance of our home. Guests admired it, tracing the lines with reverent fingers. What a beautiful family emblem, they said. My mother smiled graciously, as though she had designed it herself. My name was not on the design, not even in memory. One memory bled into the next, each more familiar than the last. My essay used for my brother's scholarship application. My photography displayed in an aunt's living room, signed with another's initials. Even a story I had told once at dinner, retold so many times by someone else that eventually it belonged to them, not me. It wasn't theft in the obvious sense. No one broke into my room, no one forced my hand. Instead, it was erasure by assignment. My labor, my words, my imagination reassigned to someone else's name. As though the only way my contributions could survive was to be stripped of me. And I had let it happen. Again and again, I told myself it was love that families share, that I should be proud my work lived on, even if my name didn't. I smiled the I'm fine smile trained since childhood, and swallowed the ache like bitter medicine. But tonight, as the napkin crumpled under my fist and laughter rattled through the crystal glasses, I understood. This wasn't sharing. This was a pattern, a system, a silent bargain I never agreed to. I create, they consume. I build, they brand. I exist, but not as myself, only as raw material for their performance. The memories kept unspooling faster now, like film unraveling in a projector. And with every scene, one truth sharpened: my invisibility wasn't accidental. It had been curated, maintained, branded. I was the ghostwriter of their triumphs, the hidden architect of their applause. And every time my name was replaced, it wasn't just omission, it was exile. Tonight, with that empty plate glinting before me, I realized the rebranding had never been about them needing my work. It was about needing me invisible. And for the first time, I felt the tape stop. The reels clicked. The film burned white. No more rewinds. When the laughter dulled and the glasses emptied, I slipped from the table as quietly as I could. No one stopped me. No one noticed. That in itself was the final toast of the night. I walked out into the evening air, the satin bows and crystal echoes still clinging to me like static, and slid into my car. My hands trembled on the wheel, not from the chill, but from the weight of everything unsaid. I didn't drive home. I couldn't. The thought of pulling into the driveway, of sitting in my room with its familiar walls, felt like suffocation. Instead, I let instinct turn the wheel, and the road carried me away in slow circles. First, I passed the old church. Its steeple rose against the sky paint, peeling but still proud. I remembered Sundays in pressed clothes, knees digging into the wooden pew hymns rising like smoke while I tried not to fidget. Back then, the church felt endless, a place where silence had gravity. Now driving past, I realized it was smaller than I remembered. Age and distance had shrunk it, or maybe clarity had. Nostalgia softened the lines, but clarity sharpened the truth. I had been kneeling in a space that taught me to stay small. From there, the road curved toward the town square, the place where I'd once run barefoot under the summer sun, chasing shadows that stretched across the fountain. The same fountain was there now, chipped stone and moss darkened by years of water. I slowed as I passed, watching teenagers lean against their bikes, laughing in the orange wash of street lamps. It was a mirror of my own youth replayed by new actors, but the script unchanged joy, spilling too fast to notice time stealing it away. Nostalgia tugged at me, but clarity whispered louder. I was never truly part of that ease even then. The light slanted as I drove farther, dipping toward the horizon in that way coastal towns always know. Charleston green framed the porch's shutters, painted in shades so dark they looked almost black until the sun caught them. Afternoon softened into evening, and the sky rippled with blues and golds like silk being folded. Out the window, the scent of freshly cut grass drifted in, sharp and earthy, mingling with the sweetness of honeysuckle climbing wild over fences. The combination was intoxicating, both grounding and fleeting, like inhaling memory itself. I rolled down the window, letting the air sting my face. Each gust felt like a hand wiping away the residue of the dinner table, the bows, the crystal, the polite laughter that had walled me out. The more miles I put between myself and that room, the more I could breathe. Nostalgia swelled in my chest, but it wasn't the trap it used to be. It was clarity dressed in familiar clothes. I could see my past for what it was, beautiful in flashes, but built on erasure. The road carried me along the shoreline where the water mirrored the sky. I slowed again, pulling over just long enough to watch the tide press against the rocks. The horizon glowed with the last threads of daylight, a reminder that even endings carry color before they darken. I sat there, engine humming softly beneath me, and realized the detour wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A refusal to go back to the same four walls, to sink into silence as though nothing had shifted. Driving past the church, the square, the porches, the honeysuckle. It was like flipping through the photo album of my life, but this time with my own captions. No one was rebranding my story here. No one was erasing my name from the frame. The memories were mine to keep, mine to reinterpret, mine to set free. When I finally turned the car back toward home, the plate from dinner still haunted me. But instead of an emblem of absence, it had become a marker, a line I could no longer uncross. I wasn't heading back to the same version of myself who had sat at that table smiling politely through someone else's punchline. I was driving towards something else, still unclear, still distant, but alive with possibility. The scent of honeysuckle lingered in my hair. The wheel was steady in my hands. And for the first time in years, the silence I carried felt less like exile and more like freedom waiting to be named. When I finally stepped back into my room, the house was silent. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe but presses down, reminding you of what you already know. I closed the door, leaned against it, and felt the residue of the dinner still clinging to me like perfume gone sour. I couldn't sit still. Not after what I'd seen, not after what I'd heard. Something inside me needed proof, not just the memory of an empty plate, not just the echo of laughter. Proof that the erasure had been deliberate. I pulled out the old tin box from the bottom drawer of my dresser. It was dented at the corners, paint scratched away in places the clasp stiff from disuse. It had once held coins, photographs, scraps of paper too important to throw away but too dangerous to keep in the open. Tonight, my hands shook as I opened it. Inside, beneath folded letters and faded receipts, I found what I half remembered, an old copy of the will. My breath caught. There it was, in black and white, my name printed clearly, not just as beneficiary, but as executor. Executor. The one trusted to carry out the family's intentions, to keep order when chaos might follow. For years, I had forgotten I was ever written into that role. Seeing it again, crisp and undeniable, felt like a ghost reaching out to confirm I hadn't imagined my worth. But ghosts don't last long. I opened my laptop, digging through archived emails until I found the one my brother had forwarded years later. A new version of the will with attachments from the lawyer. My eyes scrolled hungrily over the lines until I saw it, my name gone. Not crossed out. Not transferred, gone. My place erased as though I had never been written into the family at all. I leaned back, chest hollow. The executor had been rebranded into guest. A daughter turned into nobody with the click of a delete key. The ache pushed me further. I dialed numbers I hadn't thought to call before. Insurance, HR, the bank. I rehearsed my voice into politeness, into curiosity disguised as routine. Each line I held on crackled with bureaucratic patience. Each answer arrived blunt, almost casual. Beneficiaries changed. Executor updated. Your name isn't here anymore. As if they were reading the weather report, not confirming the rewriting of my place in the family. I scribbled notes in the margins of a yellow pad, my handwriting jagged letters leaning against each other like they too were collapsing under the weight of betrayal. Every confirmation added another brick to the wall of evidence. It was no longer suspicion. It was fact. Then I found the USB. It sat in a box of odds and ends, its plastic casing scratched a label taped across it in my brother's handwriting, original proof. I held it like it was a relic, small but humming with weight. My laptop recognized it instantly, folders springing open across the screen. Inside was everything: drafts of the will emails between relatives, scanned documents with signatures I recognized too well, metadata that whispered who had created and who had altered, timestamps that told the story more honestly than anyone in my family ever had. Each file was a confession they hadn't meant to leave behind. The tin box, the old will, the forwarded email, the phone confirmations, the USB, suddenly it was all spread before me like a crime scene. Not loud, not bloody, but quiet and precise. Paper cuts instead of knife wounds. Silence instead of shouting. I sat in the glow of my laptop, the hum of the fan filling the room. Proof layered on proof, each piece confirming the erasure I had felt in my bones. They had told me I didn't need material things. They had laughed about my freedom from possessions. But here in the files and folders was the truth: they had taken what was mine and reassigned it. Not out of love, not out of misunderstanding, out of choice. The USB sat in my palm, warm from the machine. Small, ordinary, unremarkable to anyone else. But to me, it was the centerpiece of everything, the object that carried my stolen name, my stolen place, my stolen inheritance. Original proof, not just a label, a verdict. For the first time, I realized I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was holding receipts. I thought I had gathered every piece of evidence already. The tin box, the will, the USB humming with secrets. But the past has its own way of surfacing. Sometimes it doesn't arrive in sleek files or notarized documents. Sometimes it comes back in static and paper, in voices and ink that were never meant to be revisited. It started with the cassette. An old player sat in the back of my closet, buried under scarves and yearbooks. Its buttons were stiff. The labels faded, but I remembered the weight of it instantly. I had used it as a child to record myself reading stories aloud, dreaming one day that someone might listen. Tonight, my fingers pushed play, and instead of my voice, another filled the room. My mother's. The tape hissed before her words cracked through. She's too soft, too weak, hard to rely on. I froze. The sound wasn't meant for me. It was a recording of a conversation she must have had with someone else, maybe another relative, maybe my father. But the tone was unmistakable, firm, certain, a verdict spoken with the ease of habit. I let the tape play again, rewinding, hearing the same sentence on a loop, soft, weak, unreliable. Each repetition dug deeper until the words felt carved into my skin. My chest ached as if her voice had traveled across years just to remind me why my name had been erased. But then days later, I found the letter. It was tucked in the folds of a book I hadn't opened in years, a hardback with a cracked spine. The envelope was yellowed, never sealed, the handwriting familiar and slanted. My mother's again. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. "Don't let your differences make you small," it read. "The world will try to shrink you. Don't let them. What makes you unusual is what makes you strong." I stared at the page until the words blurred. This was the same hand that had once written my birthday cards, the same loops and curves that had signed my school permission slips. But these lines were different. Tender, protective. They carried a voice I barely remembered, one that urged me to resist instead of to retreat. Two mothers sat before me now, the one on the cassette dismissing me as fragile, and the one in the letter reminding me to stand tall in my difference. Both voices real. Both hers. But how could they coexist? Which one was true? The paradox burned in me. My mother had lived as two versions at once, the public voice that undermined the private one that uplifted. To the family, I was weak, unreliable, dispensable. To the letter, I was something rare, something worth protecting from a world too quick to erase. Maybe she hadn't sent the letter because she was afraid it contradicted the role she'd already accepted. Maybe the cassette captured the version of herself that fit the family's script, while the letter revealed the quieter self she didn't dare expose. Either way, the result was the same. I grew up balancing between two truths, never sure which mother would appear. I held the letter in one hand, the cassette in the other, and felt as though I were carrying two ghosts. Both hers, both mine. One telling me I was too weak to matter, the other telling me not to forget my strength. The paradox wasn't just hers, it became mine. For years, I had smiled the "I'm fine" smile, swallowing the pain of being erased, but also secretly believing I could survive it. The cassette explained the silence I inherited. The letter explained why, despite it, I kept writing, creating, speaking, even when my words were stolen. Two mothers, two truths, one child suspended between them. I set the tape and the letter side by side on my desk. They didn't reconcile. They didn't heal. But together, they told a story more complicated than absence. A story of contradiction, of love tangled with dismissal, of presence folded into silence. For the first time, I realized my mother had not been a single voice. She was a chorus, and I had grown up learning to sing harmony with ghosts that never agreed. It happened again, but this time in public under lights too bright to deny. The stage was small, set up in the town hall with velvet curtains drawn back and a row of folding chairs for the audience. People packed the room, phones lifted in their hands like lanterns. My sister, or maybe it was my cousin, it hardly mattered anymore, stood center stage, a microphone glinting in her grip. She looked radiant in a way that cameras love. Poised shoulders, hair catching the spotlight, lips curved with practiced ease. And then she began to read. Her voice was smooth, deliberate, every word falling exactly as I had written it. Line after line, cadence intact, even the pauses I had sketched into the margins of my draft. My sentences, my metaphors, my heartbeat ghost-written into her throat. The crowd applauded after the first paragraph, nodding in rhythm as though they'd discovered something remarkable. I sat in the back row, half-shadowed, my nails digging crescents into my palm. I knew those words like I knew the pattern of freckles on my arm. They were mine, pulled from sleepless nights and quiet mornings, bent into shape by hands that no one in that room would ever see. When the speech ended, the applause thundered. Phones waved, flashes burst. Within hours, the video appeared online, captioned with glowing headlines, "A star is born, her voice lights the room." People shared it like a revelation, like a miracle that had bloomed from nowhere. Nowhere. That's where I lived in their narrative. I didn't argue. I didn't rush to post screenshots of drafts or emails proving the words had come from me. I didn't text her, didn't call her, didn't demand she correct the record. By then, I already understood how this family operated: appearances first, truth later, if ever. So instead, I downloaded the video. Click. Saved. My cursor hovered over the folder I had created months ago, a folder I never showed anyone. Its name glowed on my desktop like a quiet warning: receipts. Inside, I kept everything. Copies of wills, screenshots of emails, photographs of signatures that looked too neat to be real. And now this video joined them, a neat little package of evidence preserved not for vengeance, but for memory. Proof that I hadn't imagined my own erasure. Proof that I had existed in the cracks of their performances. Some people steal in shadows, but my family had perfected another art: curatorial theft. Polite, polished, applauded. They didn't break in and take. They showcased. They displayed. They wore my labor like an accessory, parading it in public with a smile so graceful that no one thought to ask who had done the stitching. The internet called her a star. The audience called her brilliant. My family called her our pride. And I sat alone with a USB, a tin box, a letter, and now a video, each file a shard of the same broken mirror. I told myself silence was my choice, that I was strong enough not to need recognition, that the evidence was enough. But as I watched the video on repeat, the paradox gnawed at me. Why should I need proof of myself? Why did I have to keep receipts while others walked freely in the glow of applause? The cursor blinked on the file name, patient, insistent. Receipts. It felt less like a folder and more like a heartbeat. Each item inside was a refusal, a quiet declaration. You can erase me in public, but you cannot erase the record I keep. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The cheers from the video still rang in my ears, overlaying the silence of my room. And in that silence, I felt it clearly. The theft wasn't just of words or credit or recognition. It was of my place, my presence, my right to be seen. Curatorial theft. Polite on the surface, devastating underneath. They had stolen not by force, but by performance. And I had become the invisible curator of my own life, keeping the archives, preserving the receipts, waiting for the day when silence itself would no longer be enough. I had grown used to discovering theft, not in the form of a break-in, but in the slow bleed of trust. Papers, speeches, names, all erased in silence. But nothing prepared me for the ledger. One late evening, after the house had gone quiet, I logged into the old account my father and I once shared. It was supposed to be temporary, a practical arrangement when I was younger, when he said, "This way I can help you manage." Back then I accepted it, believing it was protection. But tonight, as the screen flickered to life, my stomach dropped. The balance was lower than I remembered. Not vanished, just thinner, chipped away. I scrolled through the transactions. Withdrawals, small and steady like droplets falling through a crack in a jar. Each one insignificant on its own. But together they told a story someone had been drinking from the well I thought was mine. I called the bank the next morning. The clerk's voice was calm, routine, reciting policy as though she were reading a grocery list. "Yes, there is a secondary access on this account." Secondary access. The phrase struck me harder than any insult. Not theft, not fraud. Just permission granted long ago, still active. A loophole that allowed what felt like betrayal to masquerade as legality. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the black screen of my phone. My father had said I didn't need possessions, didn't need material things. And now here it was in numbers, in decimals. Even what little I had was considered communal, siphoned away without consent. But this time I didn't fold. I didn't file it under receipts to collect dust with all the other evidence. Instead, I went to the bank in person. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and disinfectant, the kind of cleanliness meant to reassure you that money here was safe. I sat across from the banker, my hands folded neatly, but my pulse hammering. "I want to close the joint account," I said, my voice steady. "And I want to open one in my name only." She nodded, typed, printed, stamped. The motions were mechanical, but for me they were seismic. She slid the final receipt across the desk. I picked it up, and for once it felt like more than paper, it felt like reclamation. I withdrew what was left. Not much, but enough. Enough to mark a line between the version of me who had smiled politely through toasts about spiritual wealth and the version who now demanded proof of her own autonomy. When I got home, I slipped the receipt into a new folder on my laptop. Its name glowed like a mantra mine. Unlike receipts, this wasn't about documenting their theft. This was about archiving my survival. The folder was small, only a single file at first, but its existence shifted something in me. It was evidence not of what they had taken, but of what I had reclaimed. For years, they had curated me into absence, branded me as the one who didn't care about possessions, the one who could live without. But here was proof otherwise. Proof that I could choose. Proof that what was mine could stay mine. As I closed the laptop, the weight of the receipt settled in my chest. Not heavy, not bitter. Solid. A beginning. In that moment, I realized autonomy isn't always a roar. Sometimes it's a folder on your desktop labeled simply defiantly, mine. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, not the I'm fine smile, not the train mask, but something real, fragile, alive. The gallery smelled faintly of paint and polished floors, a sterile fragrance broken only by the murmur of strangers. White walls glowed beneath track lights, each canvas lined up like a secret waiting to be confessed. My first exhibition. My name printed neatly on the placard at the entrance. For weeks, I had told myself it didn't matter if anyone came, that the act of creating was its own reward. But as the room filled with chatter and footsteps, I kept glancing toward the door, waiting for a face I knew. Friends arrived first. They hugged me, held my hands, told me how proud they were. Their eyes lingered on the canvases with curiosity, their voices soft with awe. But behind their warmth was a question I could feel even if they didn't ask. Where is your family? The answer was silence. And then it was time to reveal the piece I had held closest. Inheritance. It hung at the far end of the gallery, a table rendered in stark strokes of oil paint. Crystal glasses glinted in muted whites. Napkins folded like petals, chairs aligned in symmetry. But at the heart of the composition was absence. One chair left deliberately empty, its outlines sketched in faint blue-gray, a ghost of presence never acknowledged. People stopped before it, tilting their heads, whispering. Some said it felt haunting. Others said it was serene. One friend asked if it was about loss. I only smiled and said, it's about inheritance. What I didn't explain was that every detail in the painting carried the residue of the dinner table I had left behind, the polished surface, the gleam of appearances, the perfection masking exile. The empty chair was my chair, the one placed at the margins, the one never meant to belong. In paint, I had preserved what silence tried to erase. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family hadn't come. Not one of them. They had been so eager to stand on stages with my words, to embroider my designs into their celebrations, to cash the checks of my effort. But when it was my name on the wall, they chose absence. And that absence was louder than any presence could have been. I walked among the visitors, listening to their comments. So evocative. So raw. So precise. Their praise filled the air like music. But beneath it, a quieter melody played in me, an acoustic I couldn't silence. Some people are raised to host, but never to belong. That was my inheritance. Not money, not property, not heirlooms. An inheritance of silence. An inheritance of watching others celebrate with what I had built while I was told to be grateful for the privilege of setting the table. But here in this gallery, the script flipped. The table was mine. The chair was mine even in its emptiness. The absence that once humiliated me had become the centerpiece, the object people leaned in to study, to question, to feel. What had once been erasure had become evidence framed in gold, hung on a wall with my name beneath it. I stood at the edge of the crowd, arms folded, watching strangers commune with a ghost of me. And for the first time, the silence didn't sting. It spoke. It told the truth. Maybe my family would never see it. Maybe they would pretend this exhibition never happened, just as they had pretended my contributions didn't exist. but I knew deep down the canvas would outlast them. Paint doesn't forget the way people do. The empty chair would remain long after the applause died, long after the lights dimmed. Waiting, witnessing, belonging in its own quiet defiance. The ballroom shimmered in gold. 40 years of marriage deserved spectacle, or so the invitations had promised, and the chandeliers obeyed, raining light across satin tablecloths, polished silverware, and floral arrangements tall enough to block sightlines. A string quartet filled the air with polite celebration, their bows moving in practiced harmony. Guests gathered in sequined gowns and pressed tuxedos, champagne glasses raised before the first toast even began. At the check-in table, a hostess smiled, her lips painted into professionalism, and slid a card across to me. I picked it up, expecting my name, perhaps daughter, perhaps nothing at all. Instead, the badge read, Support Staff. I blinked. Surely it was a mistake. But the woman gestured toward the ballroom without pause, as though nothing were wrong. And suddenly I understood this wasn't error. It was script. I was not here as family. I was here as background. A prop dressed in black, carrying the role they had rehearsed for me all my life. Invisible. Useful if silent. I pinned the card to my dress. Not because I accepted it, but because it felt like prophecy. The lie was almost too perfect not to wear. Inside, the celebration unfolded in waves. Toasts rose and fell, each speaker holding the microphone like a baton in a relay of praise. My brothers were lauded for their business successes, my sisters for their charitable contributions, my parents' friends for their loyalty through decades. Names rang out like bells, filling the room with recognition, validation, belonging. My name never came. I clapped politely when the others were honored, my palms stinging under the strain of pretending. I smiled, the practiced smile I had mastered since childhood. But beneath the surface, the words I had written in secret pressed against my chest like a note folded too many times. When the microphone passed my way, I rose. Calmly. No dramatics. No trembling. My heels clicked against the parquet floor as I stepped into the glow of the chandelier. The room hushed not out of reverence, but curiosity. What could the support staff possibly say? I lifted my glass. To the couple, I began my voice steady, almost gentle. 40 years together is no small feat. Tonight we've heard about business triumphs, charitable deeds, and legacies worth remembering. But I'd like to add one more. I paused, feeling the silence lean forward. Thank you, I said, for teaching me the art of becoming invisible. For showing me again and again how to play a role without credit. How to stand in a room without being seen. How to disappear so perfectly that absence itself looks like elegance. The words landed quietly, not sharp enough to scandalize, but clear enough to echo. Glasses froze midair. Smiles stiffened. My father's hand tightened on his flute of champagne. My mother's eyes flickered, caught between pride and panic. I did not wait for applause. I did not wait for correction. I lowered my glass, stepped away from the microphone, and returned the badge to the check-in table on my way out. There was no storm, no slammed doors, no raised voices. Only the sound of the quartet resuming their melody as I walked into the night. For once, I wasn't cast as guest or support staff or ghost. I wasn't waiting for someone else to name me. By leaving, I claimed the only role that had ever been mine to play the lead in my own story. Outside, the air was crisp, the night sky wide and mercifully empty. I breathed it in, unmasked, unbound. And in that breath, I realized invisibility can be rewritten. It doesn't have to mean exile. It can mean exit. The morning after the gala, the house was heavy with the scent of stale wine and wilting flowers. Silver trays leaned against the sink, lipstick stains still clinging to crystal stems. The celebration had ended, but the residue of it clung to every surface as if the night itself refused to let go. My siblings gathered in the dining room, hair undone, voices low the way actors sound after curtain call. They called it cleaning up, but it was more ritual than chore sorting leftovers, recapping highlights, rehearsing their own brilliance one more time before the memory cooled. I sat apart the USB in my pocket like a pulse. My fingers brushed it again and again as if the small device were a talisman burning against my palm. All night I had replayed my toast, the silence that followed it, the way my father's knuckles whitened around his glass. And I knew words would never be enough. Not my words, not anymore. So I stood, walked to the television in the corner, and without asking, I plugged in the USB. The screen flickered blue to black, then brightened with a title card, Original Proof. My siblings groaned, thinking it was some home video, maybe an indulgence. But the first slide appeared and the room froze. Slide 1, the old will. My name, bold and undeniable, printed as executor. Slide 2, the revised will, my name vanished. The date stamped at the top, the edits clear. Slide 3, transaction records. Small withdrawals stacked like bricks each line. Another subtraction, another reminder of the siphoning no one had admitted aloud. Then came the audio clip. The room filled with our mother's voice from the cassette. She's too soft, too weak, hard to rely on. Her words ricocheted off the walls sharper now than when I'd first heard them. My siblings shifted in their seats, some scoffing, some staring at the floor. And finally, the video. My sister on stage, delivering my words with radiant confidence. The applause, the headlines, the captions calling her a star, on the screen in white letters against black. Sometimes you have to show what they forced you to hide. The silence that followed was a cavern. Then came the responses like stones thrown into water. This is out of context. You're embarrassing the family. Why would you air this in front of us? I stood still, the remote steady in my hand. My throat was dry, but my voice was clear. It was already here, I said. I just turned on the light. No one clapped. No one thanked me. Some left the room muttering about drama, about betrayal. Others stayed eyes wide, their silence heavier than any insult. But I didn't flinch. For once, I wasn't the ghostwriter of their story. I was the narrator of my own. The USB glowed faintly in the port, and I thought of all the years I had swallowed proof, folded it into napkins, buried it in drawers, archived it under names like receipts and mine. Now it was no longer hidden. It was projected, magnified, undeniable. I knew they would spin it. They always had. Out of context, ungrateful, shameful. But the evidence remained. It filled the room like sunlight through curtains, harsh, unflattering, real. For the first time, I didn't need them to believe me. I only needed them to see. The days after the brunch fell quiet in a way I hadn't anticipated. No calls, no messages, no knock at my door. My phone lay face up on the desk screen, black as though waiting for something it already knew would never arrive. Silence became its own kind of performance. My mother canceled her charity luncheon, citing exhaustion, though I knew the real reason it was easier to disappear than to answer questions. My siblings went quieter on social media. The flood of curated photos, the polished captions, the glittering evidence of their flawless lives slowed, then stopped. The family brand, so carefully staged, flickered like a dying marquee. But no one called me. At first, the emptiness stung. I thought I wanted confrontation, even anger, anything that acknowledged the rupture. Instead, they chose absence, as though by erasing me harder, they could erase the light I had turned on. One evening, as twilight deepened into indigo, I gathered what remained, the USB heavy with its archive of truths. A stack of photographs from birthdays, graduations, fleeting smiles that had once felt whole. And a note I wrote in black ink on plain paper. This is the last thing I will leave at this house. I placed them in a small wooden box, the kind meant for keepsakes, though I knew mine would never be kept. The lid closed with a soft snap, final and deliberate. Then I walked outside. The air was damp with the scent of cut grass and early summer rain. The tree stood where it always had, just beyond the porch, its roots pushing stubbornly against the sidewalk. It had been the backdrop of childhood games of family photographs posed in forced harmony. Tonight, it became something else a witness. I bent down, slid the box beneath the roots, and rested my hand on the bark. The wood was cool, rough against my palm, grounding me in its indifference. Trees don't choose sides. They don't curate or erase. They endure, holding secrets in their rings, carrying time without judgment. Leaving the box there wasn't surrender. It was return. a way of giving back the records that had bound me for too long. I no longer needed to hold them. I had already spoken, already projected, already named myself. By placing the box at the base of the tree, I was saying, "The archive is yours now. The silence is not mine to carry anymore." But I didn't leave my voice there. That was the difference. The files, the photos, the proof they were artifacts, not identity. I kept my voice, my story, my presence. Those belonged to me, untouchable, untransferable. I straightened, watching the box sit in shadow. No spotlight, no witnesses, no applause. Just me and the tree and the sound of the wind threading through its leaves. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, as though the ghosts I had cataloged were finally leaving with it. When I walked away, I didn't look back. The house loomed behind me, dark windows reflecting nothing. Let it stay that way. The box lay at the roots, a quiet offering of final receipt. Not a plea for recognition, not a demand for reconciliation. A marker. A line drawn. This is the last thing I will leave at this house. And as I stepped into the night, the silence no longer pressed against me. It expanded spacious and clean making room for something I had never truly been allowed my own voice, unburdened, unhidden, undeniable. When I returned home that evening, the quiet met me like an old companion. But it wasn't the silence of exile anymore. It was softer, more deliberate, like a space I could finally inhabit without apology. I set my keys down, let my shoes rest by the door, and stood in the center of the room for a long moment listening. The house had always felt small compared to the family's great dining rooms and banquet halls. Tonight it felt infinite, a canvas stretched taut waiting. I moved first to the window. The latch creaked as I pushed it open, and the night air rolled in cool and steady, brushing against my skin. Outside, the garden breathed lavender. I had planted it almost absent-mindedly years ago, never knowing I'd one day need it as much as I did now. The fragrance lifted into the room, herbal and sweet, a quiet antidote to the perfume-drenched nights I had endured. The kettle hissed to life when I set it on the stove. I leaned against the counter, watching the faint coil of steam build, listening to the low rumble gather itself into a whistle. Pouring the hot water into my favorite mug, I dropped in a sachet of chamomile and lavender, the scent doubling, wrapping itself around me like a shawl. The mug was chipped at the rim, unremarkable to anyone else, but to me, it was proof not every vessel had to be perfect to carry warmth. I carried the tea to my easel where a blank canvas waited. For days, maybe weeks, I had avoided it, afraid that starting something new would feel like admitting I had lost too much. But tonight, the air, the lavender, the weight of silence, they all pressed me forward. I picked up the brush. The first stroke was hesitant, a pale line across the white. Then another, stronger. The shape began to emerge, a girl in a yellow dress. Yellow, luminous, defiant, uncompromising. The color of sunlight refusing to dim even in a shuttered room. I painted her standing in the center, the focal point, her posture firm. Her chin tilted just enough to suggest dignity without arrogance. Around her, I placed chairs. Rows and rows of them turned away, their wooden backs looming like walls. Not a single chair faced her. They formed a cage of polite dismissal, a perfect metaphor for every dinner, every gala, every toast where I had been present but not seen. The chairs were painted in dark strokes, heavy browns and shadowed blacks until they seemed almost sculptural, like monuments to indifference. But in the middle of that darkness, the yellow dress glowed brighter with each stroke of my brush. I layered it with golds and ochres, with light that seemed to rise from within her rather than fall from without. She didn't beg for the chairs to turn. She didn't wilt under their backs. She stood luminous, her existence an act of defiance. Hours passed. The tea cooled beside me, forgotten, as the room filled with the sharp scent of oil paint mingling with lavender from the window. My hand cramped, but I kept going, tracing each fold of the dress, each edge of the chairs, until the scene was complete. When I finally stepped back, breath shallow, I saw more than a painting. I saw a manifesto. For so long, I had lived waiting for recognition, hoping someone would turn their chair, call my name, let me belong. But belonging on their terms had always meant vanishing on mine. The painting was proof that I no longer needed their gaze. I could choose presence without permission. I whispered the words aloud, steady. Deliberate, as if speaking them might etch them into the air itself, I stop hoping to be seen. I begin choosing to be present. The girl in the yellow dress seemed to nod back at me. She was not smiling, not pleading, not apologizing. She simply was. And that was enough. I sat down with the cooled tea lavender clinging to my skin, the painting drying in the corner. For the first time in years, the silence in my home didn't feel like exile. It felt like sanctuary. Presence, I realized, is not something you're granted. It's something you claim. And that night, in the quiet hum of my own walls, I chose it. The room was still the kind of stillness that arrives after storms, not fragile, but firm, like the air had finally chosen its shape. My painting of the girl in the yellow dress leaned against the wall, her backlit figure glowing faintly in the dim light. Her defiance was wordless, her posture unbending, and yet she said more than I ever had in those crowded family halls. I sipped the last of my lavender tea cold now, but comforting all the same. The steam had faded, but the memory of it lingered, rising in slow, invisible spirals like the traces of myself I had once believed were gone forever. And as I sat there, surrounded by the echoes of what I had carried, a truth formed steady in my chest. It was less a thought than a mantra, the kind you don't invent so much as uncover. Family does not always mean fairness. Conditional love is nothing more than control disguised as a smile. I let the words settle, repeated them silently until they fit into me like a bone I hadn't realized was broken. My family's smiles had always been practiced, polished, presented like gifts. But behind them was the ledger of control, the joint account siphoned without consent, the will rewritten in silence, the toasts that turned me into a punchline. Their affection had always come with terms, with clauses too small to see, but heavy enough to suffocate. And yet here I was intact, not whole in the way they defined wholeness, not shining under their chandeliers, but whole in the way that mattered. I had walked through the archive of erasure, the empty plate that mocked me, the napkin I clenched under the weight of their laughter, the USB that glowed like a black box recorder of every theft, the gallery painting of the empty chair, and finally the girl in yellow who refused to vanish no matter how many backs were turned. Each artifact had been a mirror, a receipt, a prophecy, and each one had led me here. The truth is, I no longer needed their recognition. I no longer waited for their applause. What I needed, what I had finally claimed, was my own presence. Not the performance of being fine, not the borrowed voice of someone else's credit, but the quiet, radical decision to stand, to paint, to speak. To exist without asking permission. But I also know this, I am not the only one. That's why I want to turn toward you, the one listening now. The one who has walked with me through these scenes, who has felt the sting of the joke that wasn't funny, who has known the weight of being applauded only in someone else's name. Have you ever had to choose yourself over acceptance? Comment 1 if yes. Comment 0 if not. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this circle of voices reaches. Because here's the truth. They never taught us. Silence multiplies when it hides in corners, but so does presence. The moment one voice breaks through, others hear the crack and recognize themselves in it. The receipts you carry in drawers, the unsent letters folded into books, the tapes and photos and fragments you thought belonged only to you. They are not just your burden. They are your proof. And proof deserves a place in the light. I have learned that justice doesn't always arrive as reconciliation. Sometimes it arrives as testimony. Sometimes it arrives as a painting or a folder labeled mine or a video file saved under receipts. And sometimes it arrives as a voice steady and tired but unbroken saying, I am here. So if this story touched something in you, if it brushed against a silence you've carried, I want you to stay. Subscribe. Not because my voice is enough, but because there are so many voices still waiting to be heard. There are countless stories that begin with an empty plate, an erased name, a turned chair. And the next story might be yours. Presence is contagious. When one person chooses it, others remember they can too. I stop hoping to be seen. I begin choosing to be present. The words repeat in me like prayer, like promise, like warning. I know my family may never turn their chairs. I know their silence will stretch, their smiles will return curated and precise. but I no longer wait for them. I have chosen presence, and presence is mine to keep. So let this be my closing and my opening. Family does not always mean fairness. Conditional love is control dressed as affection. But presence is freedom. And it belongs to all of us. Subscribe and stay with me here. Because there are many more voices that deserve the room, and the next voice that matters could be yours.